welcome to the first of today's masterclasses on sound. My name's Alex Graham. Set up a production company called Wall to Wall. I suppose the relevant thing about me as far as this session is concerned is that I've worked in all different genres, from light entertainment, The Voice, to drama, New Tricks, The Girl, and documentary, factual programming, Who Do You Think You Are, Long Lost Family, Man on Wire, etc. So I've kind of been across the genres, as indeed have my guests here. Sound has always been important, crucial for television, but I think it's fair to say probably the changes in technology over the last decade or two have made it even more important. I'm old enough to remember that the very last thing you did at the end of carefully dubbing the soundtrack onto your film was to play the soundtrack through a crappy old 1950s speaker so that you could be sure what it sounded like when people listened to it at home. Now, of course, we all have home cinemas, we have Dolby 5.1, we have Dolby 17.3, we have goodness knows what. And that makes an even bigger challenge. We may talk about this later for my distinguished guests on the panel. We're fortunate today to have two of the best sound men in the business. On my far left, Robert Edwards, sound recordist, dubbing mixer on the Oscar-winning Anne Frank Remembered. Currently sound supervisor on one of the, I think it's fair to say, noisiest shows around, X Factor. And we'll talk a bit about, I mean, you'll get a sense of the range of his work coming up in the next hour or so. And next to him, Simon Clarke, location sound recordist, again working across all genres. Simon recently got a BAFTA nomination for his work on Peter Kuzminski's The Promise, and we'll see a little bit of that later on too. Now this is, as Stuart said, actually I'm quite happy to get intelligent questions from you as well as stupid ones, but I would like to get questions, so we're not going to save all the Q&A until the end. If someone says something that you don't understand or frankly just irritates you, then put your hand up. I will try and come to you and get a question, try and make this as interactive as possible. However, I do have two distinguished sound recordists on the panel, and they will get very upset if you don't wait for the microphone before you ask the question. Anyway, let me start, before we go to the first clip, just quickly. I mean, I think that it's fair to say that at times on location, certainly sound recordists are treated slightly as the poor relation. They're the person trying to stop you filming because they can hear an airplane that nobody else can. I mean, so what has the job meant to you? I mean, why sound?
I think the thing that's always intrigued me about sound, especially in television, is that nobody really understands sound apart from the sound people. So you get largely left alone on a shoot to do your own thing. At the end of the day, it has to be the same thing as the production want. But essentially, you are left pretty much alone because a lot of the concentration within television and film is with the picture, quite understandably. However, without the sound, you're in a very, very sticky place when you come to look at the dub, and a very costly place if the sound's not right to start with. You can basically look at sound as the wanted sound and the unwanted sound. And you have to think about that when you're approaching any of these clips we're going to see. You're going to look at things, what is actually wanted? What do you want to hear? What would you like to hear? As opposed to what is actually there that we don't want to hear. So you have to make a judgment all the time about what you want to hear, what you don't want to hear. You don't want to hear the plane when you're watching a period drama. So that's why the soundman puts his paw up and says, actually, look, sorry, can we go again? And then you saying, but there's a microphone somewhere, you can't put the microphone closer, and all of those sort of discussions go on. But it's about the value judgment all the time. It's about what's wanted and what's not wanted. Okay. Whether it's wanted by you as the sound man and you as the production, in the ideal world, that's the same thing.
Okay. Well, I hope we'll talk a bit more about that. Simon?
As far as I understand, the whole thing about sound is, with me, is an obsession. And I've just always been fascinated by the very fact that I can capture what I'm saying, what Alex is saying, or what Robert's saying, and play it back to you. So where my first memories of actually any kind of entertainment were all oral. When I was a kid, I used to listen to the radio an enormous amount just because radio was there, it was all there, so I just became completely fascinated with it. And the reason that I do it is because I just love the whole process of storytelling and filmmaking. It's not quite as glamorous as some people say it is, but it's just a team thing. It's the best team thing in the world. When it works, it's like a fantastic love affair with 50 people.
There you go. Love affair with 50 people, man. That's, I think we should go to the first clip at that point, actually. So just in case any of you, as Stuart was saying, I understand some of you might have had a heavy night last night, so we thought we'd start with something that might wake you up. So this is an example of Robert's work on X Factor.
They love performing, we love watching them perform. It's a win-win. So here they are singing together. It's the X Factor finalists.
I'll be your light, your match, your burning sun. I'll be the bride in black, just making you run. We'll feel alright, yeah, we'll feel alright, 'cause we'll work it out, yeah, we'll work it out. I'll be doing this if you're headed down to the love one's out, to the love one's out. I'll be your ghost, your day, stay young, I'll be your view.
And the pair gets the finale as well. One more time, give it up for the X Factor finalists.
Okay, so I mean, the first and most obvious thing to say here is that this is live, so there's no fixing this afterwards if it goes wrong. This is all going out. So can you just talk us through what's going on here? You know, how many different sources are you dealing with? And I have this vision of you sitting at some massive desk trying to kind of control everything like some giant. Can you just talk us through what's happening?
So back to this wanted and unwanted sound thing. I mean, the sound is going to match the shots. So in that clip, every individual member of the bands or the people all had lines each. There were, I think in week one, I think it was week two, but there were 31 live hand mics. But you can't put 31 mics up, just put them in a row and hope for the best and think it will sort of mix itself. Because the unwanted sound is the spill from the foldback, because none of them are on in-ears for that part of the show, which is the little in-ear monitoring systems, because of a costume change that has to happen to them. They are in that costume at the very top of the show. And also from a cost point of view, putting them on 31 individual mixes at that stage of the show is very expensive. So they have to rely on the foldback wedges, which are hidden in the front of the stage, to hear the track.
Does everyone understand what foldback is? No, do you
Well,
want to just explain?
okay, so,
if you see a rock band performing and they have those little speakers in front
Yeah.
of them, and so it's like the way that the singers or the band can hear themselves. I mean, do you want
Yeah, so basically in the stage hidden are loudspeakers for them to hear the track, which is a pre-recorded backing track, which has got all the music on it. I've got control over elements within the backing track. I've got, for instance, I would have the strings maybe, or the drums or something separately split out, so I can adjust, both I can adjust what's going on the television sound, but also what they're hearing in the speakers can be adjusted. So they're all singing, listening to their own voices. So the unwanted sound is the sound coming from those speakers, which tends to colour up and change the sound that's coming down the microphones. So each one of those individual vocal mics has to be written on each line of the song as to whoever is singing that. So there's a mixing element going on for the live microphones at that stage. There's also the audience there which are reacting. So there are another 15 or 20 microphones that are being blended effectively to make the sound of the audience to help reacting to it. There's Dermot there. When he stops speaking, there's always continuously throughout the almost 2.5 hours or 2 hours of the show, we always have a music bed or different music beds that go on, which all have to blend in with each other. So there's an element of multi-layer sound going
So
on.
have you got the equivalent of a kind of musical score that you know exactly who's coming in and who's singing
Yeah,
when?
what I do, I get them to print. This weekend, for instance, I had to take that, and all these bands all have an order as to who is going to sing which lines in any of those songs. So I have it on a sheet of A4. The camera script is over lots and lots of pages because, as you notice, there were shots throughout that piece, and maybe that'd be 5 or 6 pages. I don't have time to turn over 5 or 6 pages while that's going on because one hand I've got the audience, the other hand I'm mixing that, plus it's just myself and an assistant who's playing. So it's just the two of us working on the show, mixing it at that stage. So I have it on a sheet of A4, which I mark up with all the.
But you know what shots the director's going to call, so you know.
Well,
that's
funny enough,
influencing
it's the other way around. The music
Okay.
department decide who is going to sing which line.
Right.
So at 10 o'clock on a Sunday morning, when we do the sound check rehearsal for that particular part of the show, I will know who is going to sing which line, and that gets them told to the director. So the director then cuts the pictures because it's pointless him cutting the pictures to somebody that's not singing a line. So it's actually the sound department working the opposite way around to what you would normally expect.
Okay.
The director has to respond to what the music department have decided is going to happen.
And they're singing on X Factor, they're singing to a backing track. On The Voice, we have a live band.
Yes.
So, I mean, from a sound recording, does it make a difference whether you've got a live band or a backing track?
We had a live band last week. It just makes a difference. You probably have another 70 inputs to deal with. But overall, I mean, as I said, the sound console I work in can have over 1,000 input paths. That doesn't mean there's 1,000 inputs. On the X Factor, we did a calculation. It's about 150 different sources. That includes all the personal microphones, all the radio microphones. I mean, we have the biggest licensing arrangement for radio microphones that's on a current television show. We use 120 radio channels.
150 different sources
Yeah, so
that you are molding into a final piece of sound.
Reverb machines, echo machines, VTR machines, bed machines, playback machines, all of that sort of stuff. But it's about how you organise that. It's all very well to say, isn't this impressive, we have a large stuff. It's pointless. I'm an old person, basically, still doing this job. I have to organise it into smaller chunks to deal with it, because the desk I have has got 12 layers. I have to have a plan for how that's happening. And that's the key to all of this, is actually planning before you get into the studio what you're going to do and how you're going to break the very big problem down into a much smaller set of simple problems.
Okay. So, Robert, you said you were an old man. So give us a quick, how did you, I mean, everyone here is kind of starting out. How did you get started?
Okay, well, I did applied physics at Kingston, and to earn money, I used to play music in the evenings. So, play drums or piano or whatever. So it's the two sort of things you need for sound. You need an appreciation of systems, basic understanding of electronics and all of that. Increasingly, that's becoming IP, internet-based and all of that. I started out by doing, as I say, music and electronics. I applied. I always knew what I wanted to do. I always wanted to do television sound. I applied to the BBC as soon as I left, and they said, just forget it. You won't be any good at all at it because you're red green colour deficient. We always have to have, all our sound engineers always have to have perfect colour vision. So they said, forget a career in television. So when that's all you've wanted to do, you thought, So I then applied to Granada, I applied to Thames at that stage. These were the independent companies that were in existence. I had the same response to them because they'd modelled themselves on the BBC and their recruitment policy was the same. All sound technicians and sound engineers also had to have perfect colour vision. I applied to Southern, who were in Southampton at that stage, who had a reputation, funnily enough, for doing Glyndebourne Opera and all of that stuff. And their chief engineer, he said, you know, you've got all the right qualifications. I can't see how this will be a barrier to you. If it doesn't work out, we'll just sack you after 3 months. So I said, fair enough. And now, I mean, so I've been doing it now for 40 years. And it's funny, now when I go back, because I work quite often as a freelance for the BBC, and I always go in and I always say, well, technically you shouldn't be employing me, you know, on this show.
Brilliant.
Because, and it's all about determination. I was determined that that's what I wanted to do. And I wasn't prepared to, you know, let something like that stand in my way. And I think that's always going to be the way. If you are determined enough to do what you want to do, you'll find a way.
Okay. Simon, how about you? How did you get into this business?
Well, as a fellow red-green colourblind person, I think it's actually a prerequisite for sound. If you are colourblind, quite honestly.
So any of you who have
got it
perfect
made.
colour vision, just forget sound, I would think.
I come from the other side of the world of sound. So what Rob does is an extremely, apart from being very artistic, it's a very, very technical job. I do the nuts and bolts on the floor, recording people next to motorways, whispering "I love you" to each other. How I got into it is basically because I made a complete mess of school. Have next to no qualifications whatsoever, but I was obsessed. So I went to work in post-production. I got myself a very low-paid job as the person that they kick in the back of a mixing studio, a dubbing theatre, and I got. They agreed to take me on for 7 weeks, and I stayed for 7 years because I actually realised that I was in heaven. This is what I really, really enjoyed. And I started learning on the job because I was fascinated. So I just sucked in all the knowledge that I possibly could. Everybody who said anything about everything from a decibel to a nanobaber, I was, oh really? That's fantastic. So I learned that way, stayed in post-production for quite a long time. I can never remember how long. And took a slight left turn renting out camera and sound equipment briefly in the 1980s. And then decided I wanted to go out on the road and do it. So my side of sound is very, very different. I always say to the guys that come and work for me, or the trainees who work for me, and all the people who send me emails and ask for advice, it's not technical. What I do is, it is technical, and I would like you to know line level from mic level. I'd like you to know what balanced and unbalanced are and things like that. Sample rates, it's very, 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 very basic. You need to be able to get on with people. You need to be able to not be annoying when, as Alex says, you're the person trying to stop them filming.
Okay, I should point out, I probably should point this at the top, just to be clear, in case you haven't grasped this, at least for the purposes of this session, Simon is the person on location, with the cans and the various microphones, getting that sound. And in general, Robert's here to talk about that process, and actually what you'll see is that the clips that Robert's showing tend to be are about capturing sound in a not necessarily a live transmission, although they are, but in a kind of in a kind of concert hall or in a sport context, whereas you'll see that some of Simon's clips are more crafty, which brings us quite neatly to the second clip, because we've seen one clip where the challenge was literally managing this stuff live, and it's going out, what you see is actually happening as you're seeing it. This next clip, one of Simon's clips, is from a drama recreating the early days of Doctor Who. Some of you might have seen this in Adventure in Time and Space. And I think what's interesting about this, if you watch it, is the way in which the sound tells a story. I think it's something we want to talk about. We'll talk a bit more about this as we go through. Can we run the second clip, please?
Let me be very clear, young lady. Your neck's on the block.
Yeah, come on, get a move on. It's like a rabbit hutch in here. Easy.
Okay. You nice and snug?
What the hell's that? Monster for the next story. What, sink plunger and an egg whisk?
Oh well, they can't take over the universe, might be able to whip up a decent omelette.
Roll to record in 15, 14, quiet please everyone, 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, action!
You will move ahead of us and follow my directions.
On 2.
Immediately.
Tighter on 1. No, tighter. Stand by 1. On 1. Clear 3. Stand by 2. 2.
I said immediately.
My legs. On 2. My legs.
Your legs are paralyzed. You will recover shortly unless you force us to use our weapons again. In that case,
Well, everyone,
meet
The Daleks.
They're
Creepy, aren't they? They're actually really creepy.
Bring in the old man now, prisoner. 200 days ago, the radiation count was 93. It is now.
Marvellous. They don't die like that on television anymore, do they? I love seeing the man doing the Dalek voice as well. So this is drama. This is scripted. So I mean, the first thing is with Rob's clip. He's working with what he has in the studio, and he's going to be here. I'm guessing that some of what we're hearing on this clip is sound that you were actually recording on location, and some of it is stuff that has come in later. So can you just talk about sort of what, the different kind of sources that you're dealing with here, what you were actually recording on the ground and what came in afterwards?
It's quite an unusual clip, that one, and it's why I chose it. There's an enormous amount going on. In fact, I was just watching it and realised something else was going on. The biggest difference between what Robert tends to do and what I tend to do is that Robert puts things together, as you heard, that incredible thing in X Factor, that amazing soundscape, all in one. What I do is I deconstruct sound. So just about everything you heard in that came from me was recorded one at a time. We spent an enormous amount of time isolating things. So although it appears that there are the guys in that very old-fashioned control room and that they're looking, and you should be able to see in the background the Daleks are actually going through, so that scene is occurring in front of the old Marconi cameras. Of course, we're not filming the two things at the same time. We're doing it all in stages and faking it, basically. So I spend my entire time trying to get rid of the unwanted sound that Robert was talking about and just concentrate on the wanted sound. And in my case, it's little tiny things. And the reason for that is that I want the person who's kind of related to what Robert does later to be able to blend it and do what they want with it. So the nice thing about what you just heard and saw was that they could, as we come back into the control room, the sound that's going on outside where the Daleks are whizzing about, that can actually go down because that's a separate feed. The guy who's doing the Dalek, that's Nick Briggs doing the Dalek voice with the real deal, it's the real microphone. He is actually doing it on the set. We did actually process his voice and we put it onto the set through a thing called a ring modulator. And we did that really because A, that's the way that Doctor Who is done, and B, because what I was trying to do was create an atmosphere for everybody so that everybody kind of understood, as we shoot things in tiny, tiny little clips, what was going on. So it was quite fantastic. So the first time we did it, and he just, he says exterminate or whatever he says, and it comes over the speakers, but everybody in the studio is like, oh, that's quite exciting. And the great fun thing about that as well is we're radioing the sound of his voice into the Daleks because their lights flash. That does actually happen. When you shout at a Dalek, it does actually light up. They're the most fun to work with. So in terms of that, there was all kinds of things going on. The Dalek gets, so we showed you the little bit very conventional. He says, your neck's on the block, young lady. That's really, really simple. That's a boom mic on top of him. Cut, now we're in the studio. You got the guy inside the Dalek. Now what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to record his voice beautifully, pristine, clear. And what the lovely post-production people then are doing is they're giving it this fantastic sound of a guy inside a Dalek. Also, they push the Dalek past everybody. The guy starts talking about it. When we are looking at the people pushing the Dalek, when we're inside the Dalek, I hope you could actually hear that all the sound then became somewhat muffled and hollow again. That's all post-production, but what I have to do is try and make all of that as clear and bright and crisp as is humanly possible. You can always muddy things up. You can always make them sound worse. It ain't that easy to make them sound better.
So, yeah, that's a really important point, isn't it? I think you watch something at home, you kind of, and indeed, I suppose it's a bit like, I mean, really good sound recording is something that you ought not to, I mean, if you're watching something at home and you notice the sound almost, I mean, there's a strange thing in which you guys are engaged in making yourself invisible.
Yeah.
But also, I mean, the point you made, I think, I'm sure a lot of people wouldn't necessarily, is that what you are doing on the floor, what you're doing on the set, is that, you're kind of, you want to give the most perfect sound you can so that in the dubbing theatre, that can be, on the mixing desk, that can be played with in as many ways as possible. As you say, it's easy to muddy something up. It's much harder to kind of take it back. I'm
asked sometimes by people, if you've got a handheld camera, they say, well, should we put a mic on the camera? I'm saying, you can always take sound away from, if in a dub, you can always get rid of it. But if it's not there for them to have in the first place, they're not ever going to make that choice. So if you're given, somebody asks you, can they put a mic on the camera or do something like that? The answer should always be yes, because it might be helping them in the dub to save, for some atmos or something. It's as I say, it's always easier to decide not to use something, having offered it, than to actually not have it.
So it's interesting. I mean, you guys. I mean, I'm talking about you in your sort of generic roles here on the panel. I mean, you're not really working together. I mean, you might meet in the dubbing theatre eventually, but actually, you're both critically relying on one another, aren't you, in different ways? I mean, you're relying on Simon to deliver you the kind of sound that you can then shape, and then he's relying on you to take it and do.
I mean, there's a trust element in all of that. I mean, on the X Factor, none of the clips that are in the show do I ever see before they go out, because they're being post-produced right up to the moment. So I totally rely on the recordists or whoever have shot the packages that are inserted into the show for that work to be both delivered, to be mic'd up correctly in the first place, to offer the dub the right thing, and for them to dub it. I see the opening. I see the first 10 seconds of the opening titles before we go on air. It's the only bit of real VT that we actually get to, because there isn't rehearsal time to sit and do it, nor are they finished in time. So,
well, I'd also say that if you end up doing things from my side of the world, write everything down. Whether you do it electronically or do it physically. So all the audio that was for Adventure in Time and Space, because it was kind of complicated because there were an awful lot of different things going on at the same time that all had to end up being blended. Write everything down. Just tell the guys where the tracks are. Tell them why you did something, why you've split something into two different feeds, because it's not always immediately apparent, and because I won't actually necessarily meet Robert, I won't even know who's actually going to be mixing it. So just make sure you've got a lot of information that flows through.
Okay, we're gonna. I'm just going to remind you that you can ask a question if you want to ask a question. You don't have to sit passively by. So if you want to be thinking about questions you might like to ask, I am going to deliberately come to you at some point and actually force you to ask some questions. So it would be good to start thinking about them now. But I'm going to go to the next clip, and. I'm interested. We talked about we've now we've seen Simon talk about the way we construct a scripted drama, but I think what interests me about this next clip is that storytelling isn't just a function of scripted. It can storytelling, sound as a storytelling device can happen in a live situation as well. This is another of Robert's clips, which in some ways illustrates. Some even bigger challenges. This is a football clip. So whereas X Factor had an audience of, I don't know, maybe a few hundred in the studio, this has an audience of about 60,000, I'm guessing.
60,000 in the stadium. Worldwide, I'm making it for probably 1.2 billion people.
1.2 billion people watching, okay. It also has all the challenges of recording sound outside rather than in a kind of slightly more controlled environment studio. And most importantly, this clip features an even bigger ego than Simon Cowell. Shall we run the clip?
Going to Jose Mourinho himself. He's wound up Mourinho. He has been all day. his face. Ashley Cole was certainly the player wasting time. That's a booking for Torres. Yellow card for Torres. That's the very, very late chase for Liverpool. Just over a minute remaining. Coutinho. Gets a touch. Sturridge. Challenged by Matic. William. Trouble times is away. They play this right. It's going to be a 2-0 win at Anfield. It's William who can walk it in and wrap it up for Jose Mourinho. The classic counter-punch at the end of each half. Are you telling me the Champions League's the main priority? I don't think so. Equal value for Chelsea in the chase for two pieces of silverware. The master has reigned on the apprentices parade here. Mourinho's magic touch has put Chelsea squarely back in a title race. No secondary competition this.
Well, over to you, Manchester City. It's back in your hands. What a performance this is from Chelsea. They've done a job on Liverpool. And you almost feel like every single 5 minutes of this game has been planned out meticulously from him. And they've delivered on it.
Well, he's supposed to be under the weather, but it's Liverpool who are feeling sick now.
Well, the tactics have been spot on. The players have carried them out absolutely perfectly. The detail in the defending is absolutely brilliant, and he's been wound up all afternoon.
He's been wound up all week.
Okay, so I'd like to apologise sincerely to any Scousers in the audience. Also, I have to say for me, that goal was painfully reminiscent of Manchester United's second goal at the Emirates the other day, so it's hard to watch that too. As a Gooner. Anyway, so Robert, what interests me about that is that, and I'd like to again talk about, I mean, that, you know, again, we kind of sitting at home watching this and kind of just, you know, one's thinking this is what's going on, you know, and you're just out there kind of shooting it, recording it, and so on. But there's something very interesting, or at least it struck me watching this clip, there's something very interesting going on there that, you know, we see Mourinho's celebration, we see the Chelsea, and then, but that's played out against a backdrop of not the Chelsea fans celebrating the goal, but the Liverpool fans singing "You'll Never Walk Alone." And I'm kind of interested to know how much of that was kind of just there, and how much of that is a kind of active choice by the director, by you. I mean, how much are you manipulating this narrative, as it were?
You've got a lot of control over the narrative, surprisingly large amount of control. I mean, there's a similarity with the X Factor in as much as there's a crowd there. The crowd is very important in the football stadium, and there's always a debate, for instance, like on a minute silence. We could make a minute silence in a football game absolutely silent. I could take my faders out, but quite often the news story isn't about how the minute silence was observed, or it's whether it was not observed. You know, that there's often been quite times where people have taken the microphones out, and yet in the newspapers the next day there was some story about it. So you have to obviously respond to effectively a news event that's going on there. You'll have to give that. Obviously, that is the priority there. But there's a lot going on. Round the pitch, for instance, there are wanted and unwanted sound we're talking about again now. You want to hear the ball being kicked. That was something that 20 years ago when Sky started all this off, one of the things that, you know, my little company acted as consultants to them was to say it was a very much of a wash that you used to hear at a football ground. You used to have a commentator and used to hear, you know, a microphone or two in the stadium. And what we did is we suddenly increased the number of microphones. There was possibly 3 or 4 back in the day. We suddenly increased that to being 12 around the pitch. So you could, the wanted sound was the sound of the ball being kicked. You wanted to feel like you're really close to the action, as you would be if you were in a good seat, you know, in the terraces, somewhere near what was going on. And you'd hear the players shouting. Now what you don't want, the unwanted sound, funny enough, is you don't want to hear the players, nor under the Broadcasting Act, do you want to hear the players swearing at each other. So the reason we have 12 microphones is that I'm chasing the ball around the pitch as part of the job, is that as soon as they kick the ball, they don't swear before they kick the ball, it's only after they've kicked the ball. So immediately the ball's kicked, I have to go to another source to where the ball is going to. So there's a mixing element going on with where the sound of the ball kick. There's also, as you rightly pointed out, the sound of the crowd, where we have, because we mixed the game in 5.1, and that was a down mix, but the Sky transmit all the football matches in 5.1. So majority of people watch it in stereo, so that has to be done as a down mix. But the game itself is covered in 5.1. So we have a spatial array or sound array to do the sound of the crowd, which is dedicated. In a lot of the grounds, we have a permanent installation of literally, it's called a sound field microphone, which does the essence of the 5.1. But at places like Liverpool, where you do have the Cop, and there are other grounds as well, Manchester United and Newcastle, and there's about 6 or 8 of them that have permanent installations. We have some additional microphones which are over the ends where we know that there is going to be a crowd. So again, I have control over how much of that crowd and how we mix that in. Interesting, there's a link between that clip.
Of course, the good thing is that football crowds never swear, so you don't have that
exactly. So we have to run a loop. Yeah, but for legal reasons, they were concerned about again what goes on, because these matches go out at 4 o'clock in the afternoon. We have to have a loop sometimes running so that we can come away from the natural sounds. If there is some abusive chanting or whatever, we have to be able to mask that to some extent.
Because coming back to X Factor, I mean, I was drawing some of the kind of comparisons with X Factor earlier, but I mean, I suppose in a way the most obvious thing is that with X Factor, I mean, you've got a lot going on in X Factor, but what you at least have is you have a camera script, you have a plan.
Yeah, sure.
You know that this thing is going to come on, then Demit's going to do something. It's there.
Yeah.
I mean, and that clip is a classic example of it. I mean, you just don't know what is going to happen from 1 minute to the next.
This is the thing about having microphones on cameras. That was a Steadicam there, which I knew where it was operating. Again, so I need a camera plan to know where some grounds they don't allow the Steadicams to run up, and so that's not something I can use as a source. But when something like that happens, it's a reaction, isn't it? But just to say, there was a little link from your clip to my clip. In the Dalek mic you used, which is the 4104 lip ribbon mic, which is about 40, 50 years old, that's the same mic we use for the commentators, because it's used pretty much in all football stadiums because of its rejection of the wanted sound, which is the voice, against the crowd, which is unwanted when you want to have the commentator. In order to make the commentator louder than the crowd, you have to have some sort of discrimination between the levels of that. We don't want the sound of the commentator being at the same level. So in order to get control over that, you have to have the right tools in the right place.
Just one of the things that struck me about that as well, if you kind of are aware of the fact that there was all that live stuff, then we went to all the slow-mo, then we went to real-time replay, and then all that kind of stuff. It's beautifully done, because you're not aware that the soundscape isn't something kind of lurching from one thing to the other. How you're doing that, I have no idea.
There's a whoosh as well, which is graphics trace, and we invented that 20 years ago, and that's why there's graphics noises now. It's because of I brought that in from Light Entertainment, because we used to have, when you have graphics and stuff, and it's something that Sky bought into. Simon's question is really interesting. So, what do we, when we go to slow mo, what are we hearing? Well, not with the sound. Is the sound? I mean, what are we hearing when we're? It depends on what the commentator. Sometimes there might be an element of the slow mo sound in there, but it depends what else is happening outside. Right. I mean, on Celebrity Juice, which I do, where they suddenly, Keith Lemon will call up he'll want a slow-mo. He absolutely loves the fact that the sound is really, really slow. So again, he wants the effect of it sounding warm and all the underwater stuff, because it's got comedic value.
But again,
that's wanted and unwanted.
But you can control that as and when. Yeah. Have we got any questions? Oh, we have a question here. Excellent. You have to wait for the microphone. You got a microphone? Sorry. Just take a couple of questions, and then we'll have another clip, and then maybe a few more questions then.
Hello.
Hello.
I was wondering here, in video games, when you have a football match, it's pretty well constructed. The actual thing that happens on TV. I don't know, do you have any experience with editing sound for video games in this sense? Because it's very interesting because you work with kind of like samples that you create, and you work with real-time things. So like to reproduce the real-time in a fiction, I think it would be interesting to hear a bit about that.
It's the chicken and egg situation. Video games came after the real event. And what happened is that the video games people came to us and said, oh, you've got ball kicks. We'll put ball kicks in these games, because originally video games just used to have the sound wash and they were very, very crude. So what actually happened is that they would come to us and they said, hey, can we take some samples for the ball kicks? So they did ball kick samples. If you look, I've got a credit on the latest PlayStation 4 football game, because all the crowdscapes were taken from real games. So it's, in other words, the reality is feeding back into the games market. It's not the games market influencing us. It's actually what we were doing in live sound. They actually said, hey, we need to be able to do this as part of the gameplay. So every stadium that we did last season, we recorded 5.1 soundscapes for FIFA, whatever it is, 2014 or 15 or whatever it is. So it's actually the other way around. The video game is emulating what's actually happening in the reality, or the current state of mixing of football games, rather than us trying to copy them.
They are extraordinary. I watched a presentation 2 weeks ago by the Pinewood Games Group about a thing called Fable Legends, or Legends Fables, whatever. They are fantastic the way they are constructed, and they do actually employ idiots like me to go out and record things like a football being kicked about 36 different ways, and each individual thunk noise will be a blend depending on where you are in the game. So if you've got a viewpoint that's a long way away, they will create a sound that sounds as if it's further distant. And the way they do those things, partly because of the constraints of the way that the video games equipment works, the way they create those distances and what have you is incredibly clever. It is the next big thing. So if you fancy doing something in sound games,
there you go. Oh, we have another question in the front here.
So I've got two questions. The first one's to Robert. Have you ever improved the voice of somebody on X Factor in a live show?
Improved. We've never ever categorically used any auto-tune. We've never ever used it for any of the contestants. However, for some of the guest acts, we have had to use auto-tune for guest acts. But that's
Which one?
No.
Name and shame.
But all the contestants, it's because of the regulations of Ofcom and all of that. And it was a decision that was made a long, long time ago. We'd all be in court. So no, there is never any tonal enhancement at all. There's obviously things, I obviously add some reverbs or delays to their voices to help them or whatever. But there's never, we're not allowed to do that. So I had the same question when I was a consultant on American Idol, and the same thing. They were very keen. And also for the iTunes, there was a big groundswell of opinion, because we used to record the iTunes passes. I'd do the live show, and we would have to do the iTunes, and that had to be done within an hour of the end of the program. Now we do the iTunes on a Friday during the sound check, so they're available for sale. So the music department said, "Hey, great! We've got an extra 24 hours to sell these. We could tune the vocals and all of that." But then that was then thought that would distort the competition, because people would then buy the iTunes, and that would distort the market. So,
you got another question? Is
Yes,
that a quick one? Because we're going to have to get on with.
Sorry, really quick one. So we heard a lot about how sound goes right. What about things like Jamaica Inn when?
Not our fault.
No, clearly not yours. But how did it go so wrong? I guess
not the sound department's fault. One has to be slightly diplomatic. No, actually,
no, don't be diplomatic.
Not going to be diplomatic in the slightest. It was a very interesting thing. Jamaica Inn, a lot of very, very upset people in our department, lots of email groups, very, very hot under the collar. When it happened, nobody could understand what was being said, and the first thing the BBC did was they said, we need to look at the sound mix, we need to talk to the sound recordist, we need to think about the equipment that was used. Absolutely no, it was a performance issue, and that's it, that's the end of it. And won't talk about the person who was the problem. I've worked with that person, and they are always a problem.
Okay, we're going to move on. We're going to look at another example of scripted television now. This is one of Simon's clips. This is slightly different here, because we're not actually going to show a clip from the show itself. We're going to. This is a little clip we've lifted from the DVD extras. This is Peter Kosminski's series The Promise, set against the backdrop of the. I suppose fair to say, I think probably the bloody formation of Israel in the late 40s in Israel and Palestine. Very powerful war drama. And actually, Simon doesn't feature in this. We're going to see the visual effects supervisor talk a little bit about how, just an example of how sound has to deal with. I guess it's about reconstruct, but how sound is having to deal with a world which is actually not only, as it were, recreated, but completely fake. What you're seeing is not, as it were, what you're getting, or what you're getting is not what you're seeing. Can we run the clip, please?
King David Hotel was from our earliest view of the script, clearly something that was a visual effects challenge. The hotel is there now. You know, it was built in the 30s, I believe. A fairly large chunk of it was blown up by terrorists. That's very well covered in period photographs, so we knew exactly what it should look like. But the hotel was rebuilt and put back together perfectly. So nowadays you can go there and you would never know. There's a little plaque outside, but you have to look quite hard to find it. So what we did was we visited the place as it is now and took lots and lots of reference photographs. We looked at those period photographs of the real event, and we did more or less what's called a map painting, which is a traditional technique where, you know, in the old days an artist would actually paint on canvas or possibly on a sheet of glass what we should see and superimpose that on the photography of the rest of the scene, the actors and so on. We do more or less the same thing here. So if I just play this through, this is the final shot where we see the soldiers climbing up onto the pile of rubble to help pull out bodies and see if there's any survivors and so on. And we see the inside of the hotel revealed there. That's what we actually filmed. So the art department made a fairly large set, which is a big pile of rubble. There's a big kind of set of platforms underneath to hold up all these blocks of polystyrene and stone and dust and general demolition. Bit of a blue screen there behind. You can see here in shot we have the guy with the microphone, because it didn't matter, because he's going to be, all this blue screen area is going to be replaced anyway. This encompasses all the actual actors that are moving around and doing stuff. So we shrink that down to fit the composition, strip out all the stuff we don't need, the blue screen and the sound recordist and everything else, and then put in behind our matte painting. So here and here is the modern day hotel. This is all kind of cooked up out of thin air by our matte artist, looking at photographs, and then we just have to kind of do some various things to kind of make it look photographic, add a load of smoke and haze, add a little camera move. So this is the big reveal of the post-atrocity scene.
So I love that. My favourite bit, he says, well, we get rid of everything we don't need, like the sound recordist. Yeah. So talk a little bit about, I mean, you know, obviously a fascinating insight into how, you know, blue screen kind of, how you can recreate something as convincing like that from, you know, what are the challenges from the sound department's point of view there? I mean, I mean, do you quite look forward to scenes like that, because in a sense you've got a bit more control? I mean, you don't. I guess that the guy holding the boom mic doesn't have to worry about the boom mic being in shot, so he can relax almost.
Yeah, almost never happens. Yeah, it's fantastic. You know, you saw the guy came, you know, right in above our characters, because there is a load of dialogue that happens up at the top there. Yeah, it went. It's fantastic. It almost never happens. We spend most of our time with a frame, which is either rectangular or square, but usually rectangular nowadays, and that's as far as we're going to go with a microphone. Now, I might want the microphone to be there, but that's not my call, because I work in an audio-visual medium, and so therefore I'm not allowed to put microphones where I would like to put them. So that was just glorious. It was brilliant, because I asked the guys, I said, does it really matter? They went, no, we'll get rid of it. That's really quite nice of you. Everyone's wearing radio microphones. You saw there were people climbing all over the rubble. The point about that one being that we shot that in a car park in Tel Aviv. And the world, the 20th century world, I'm sorry, beg its pardon, was it 21st century? The 21st century world is out there and making a noise. Now, when the equivalent of Robert gets hold of this thing, all he actually wants to hear is the voices, especially seeing as they're quite quiet, because what they're doing is they're digging out bodies. So in reality, they're going up this pile of rubble and they're listening for any signs of life whatsoever. And at one point, the guy turns around and he goes, quiet, 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 and then he starts calling to the person who he's trying to dig out of the rubble. So they're all wearing radio mics. It's quite a challenge, all that kind of thing, because polystyrene rocks make a horrible noise. When you walk over them, it's a ridiculous noise. Like you've probably heard if you get ceiling tiles and you crunch them up. We don't want to hear that. Actually, the only thing you want to hear is the sound of bricks and things all moving together. So we spend an enormous amount of time asking the props department whether we can actually fix the bricks, drape bits of carpet over them, anything we can do to stop any other noise from happening. And it's one of those classic examples. The reason I like that one is because it just shows all that thing about deconstructing again, wanted and unwanted noise. All we wanted to hear in that was the voices. We didn't want to hear any background. We didn't want to hear the sound of the props moving. We just wanted to deconstruct it down to little bits of dialogue. And we had a camera, as you could see, flying around on a crane. Now, and we hate those. Because normally the camera department are doing what these guys are doing. You know, it's on a tripod or it's on somebody's shoulder. It's vaguely controllable. Once the camera department get hold of one of those things, all bets are off, and it's bound to end up about 30 foot up in the air, and it's bound to see absolutely everything. And the director still wants to hear the two people whispering and saying, "I love you."
So I hope you're getting a sense of this kind of just what an extraordinary challenge this sifting out wanted and unwanted sound is, and that sort of, you know, the stuff that I think we all as viewers take for granted when we see this, just how much of this has been not just about getting the sound that you want to see, you know, that is actually in the show you're watching, but actually, in a way, almost what's more remarkable is all the sounds that kind of might have been there, you know, and aren't because of the kind of care that's been taken on the set. We're going to talk, we've got a couple more clips. There's another clip from Simon. And I think this is well, it's another example of that, but it's also I think interesting to me because it's also again about storytelling, and it's also again this time I think it's fair to say in a sound context rather than a visual effects context. This is another example of what you see isn't exactly what you get. So this is a clip from you may have seen this Button and Taylor. It's a BBC4 biopic about Richard Button and Elizabeth Taylor. Let's just run the clip, and I'm going to get Simon just to talk through how this was put together.
Well, isn't that what you say a performance must always have? Some danger.
Not parrots. You really can be more irritating than anyone in the world.
I fail to see what I've done that is so terribly irritating.
They want us to fight, don't you see?
No, I don't. Why should they?
Primitive feminine instincts. Warring females. Very enjoyable.
The end! Finally! And forever!
You're not going like this.
Yes, I am!
You're not!
Oh, yes, I am! Let go of me! You're a cruel fiend! I hate you! And I loathe you!
So, Simon, again, a bit like the Doctor Who clip we saw earlier, a lot going on here. But look, you talk particularly about the audience, the theatre audience, how the staging this in front of an audience, or not.
Well, or not. So that shot in, it's supposed to be in New York, but it's actually it's shot in Wimbledon, in the Wimbledon Theatre, and as you probably guessed, the theatre was completely empty. So the shot that you saw, it looks around the back and it sees the audience. That was about, I think we got 40 people in, and then VisFX spent an enormous amount of time doing this thing they call crowd replication. So 40 people go and sit over there. Thanks very much, we've done that shot. Now you go and sit over there, and then you go and sit over there, and then you go and sit over there, and then you composite the whole thing, and that gives you this wonderful audience. Now the idea of that is that Helena Bonham Carter comes out holding a parrot, doesn't matter why. Elizabeth Taylor was a bit odd. And as she comes out, everybody goes wild and they scream and they clap. And then they see the parrot and they laugh, and Richard Burton then reacts to that because he didn't realise it was going to happen. And then we go around the back of the set. You can still hear the audience going bonkers, and that kind of fades out. Then you've got real dialogue, which has a different quality to it, to the quality of the dialogue that's actually on the set. So when you hear them, when she says, that's what a drama should be, and he says, not parrots. That's very close mic'd. They're both wearing radio microphones. We got a boom in as close as we could possibly get it. When they do all the dialogue that's actually on the set, you beast, I hate you, and I don't see what's so terribly wrong about it. All of that's actually, they are wearing radio mics, but we put planted mics all over the set because we wanted it to sound a little bit more like a theatrical thing. We wanted you to know that this is the stage performance, and this is what it sounds like when you're sitting in the audience. And when we go backstage, this is intimate. This is the two people talking, and it's something I discussed with Richard, the director, about that. I said, we probably do want to give post-production a chance to give it a different signature, a different sound when they're out on stage to when we're actually in their private lives around the back of the stage. But obviously, the other thing, so it's an empty theatre. We're not even doing the crowd replication when we do when we actually do the theatrical extracts.
So the crowd replication was shot at a completely different time.
Totally different. That was done. We'd finished actually. We did what you've just seen in about 3 days, I think. There's more stuff on stage, but yeah, it took about 3 days to do that. At the end of day 3, crowd replication guys came in and did that, and a friend of mine recorded some applause with them, which hopefully we're going to crowd replicate the applause. So Helena was, Ms. Bonham Carter was slightly concerned about walking into an empty theatre and saying things like, I don't see what's so terribly extraordinary about that. So what she actually said was to an empty room. However, she actually gets that when she's there. She gets... So I do it on an iPad now, but this was shot a couple of years ago, and I found this the other day. It's a little sampler program. So before I went on location with this, having spoken to the director about it and how they wanted this to happen, we wanted the ability for the crowd to change. We wanted her to feel that this actually was real, so she could change her timing, and you'd get all that screaming going on, whatever, but there would be laughs would be happening when she did specific things. So there are dozens and dozens of different laughs. So we rigged up a PA system, and the other thing we were trying to do, of course, was we wanted to preserve what they said without all that going on underneath it. So it's a twofold thing. We were creating this weird little thing, this imaginary audience, really, really loud, and then absolutely crashing the fader down and getting rid of it so that she could say any lines that she had to say, and then bringing it back up afterwards. And she did very nicely come around and thank me, and she did actually say it did feel, because obviously the audience is dark out there, you can't necessarily see it. She really did think that she was in an audience full of people who were laughing when she did things.
But you've got to be incredibly careful that you're not clipping the end of a line with the audience.
You must not hear any of that over any of the dialogue, because when it gets to post-production, they want a completely different laughter and applause track. They did use bits of this. We gave them all these little elements for them to create it with, but they don't want to necessarily use it. And also the other problem with this wanted and unwanted sound thing is, if you want somebody to be a little louder in the post-production mix, if you've got a background sound, if you've got my laughter track on it, or if you've got footsteps, or if you've got the polystyrene rocks, it's very basic. You push the fader up to make them louder, because maybe you want them louder, and you push everything else up as well. And you can't do that. At that point, you're in this dreaded thing called ADR, automated dialogue replacement, or post-sync you've probably heard of, where they throw my sound away and they go into a nice air-conditioned studio in Soho, they give them a cappuccino and they play them the clip and they make them do the sound over and over again until it's actually in sync, which I'm trying to avoid. It was good fun. It's slightly hairy.
Okay, we have one more clip, and then hopefully we might have time for a few more questions if there is anyone who's been saving their questions up. This is Robert's last clip, and I guess again we're back to I don't know. So was this live or was this a record?
This is for a DVD. So it was a live. DVD. It was a one-off performance.
One-off
at Royal
performance.
Opera House.
But, yeah.
but I'll tell you about it afterwards,
Yeah.
actually, because there's an interesting twist slightly.
So again, but now we're going for somewhere where
no radio mics.
There are no radio mics. You're not seeing any mics. We're in a live, as it were, opera house. So we run the last clip. Don't say we don't give you cultural diversity at the Royal Television Society. Start with X Factor, we finish up with a good piece of Beethoven. So I have to say, there's a real sense for me about how did they do that. I mean, my experience of sound recorders is they're constantly saying, so how tight are you going to be framing this shot? Where's the safe area for my microphones? You have massive weight. So how are you even getting that?
Well, it's the similarity. I mean, it's the sort of similarity and the difference between that and the X Factor and the football is they're all we're talking about crowds, we're talking about big groups of people wanting to hear individual sounds. It's the unwanted and wanted sound again. The chorus at the end was, as you can see, they all came forward, which was a great help from a sound point of view. But in fact, some of the sound from that was taken. The conductor afterwards, I was called into his room because I can read a score because that was back to the musical training. He said that there was, he wasn't happy with some of the chorus coming in and all of that. He said, after the audience went, he said, I just want to redo the end of that chorus bit. So some of that, is down to were they miming or not miming. Some of that was to a playback for part of it, and some of it was the actual, on the night. First recording. Lots of microphones along the front edge of the stage which you can't see, PCC microphones, which are called, little flat microphones, which Simon will be able to.
So how many microphones would you have in a concert hall like that to get that sound?
Well, I mean, along the stage there was probably 10 or so of these microphones, plus some, condenser microphones, and then there's the orchestra, of course, which probably had another 30 or 40 microphones, plus microphones for the crowd. The same thing on X Factor. You need microphones to pick up the audience reaction. You don't want those microphones up during the singing because obviously, whilst the sound of the concert hall is very nice, you haven't got quite the control over it that you have if you're going in for the side shots and things. So it's a combination of all those things. Those clips are three very different things, but actually it's all about sound and it's all about how you control those various elements.
Okay, we have 5-10 minutes, I think, 5 minutes. Any questions? Okay, there's one at the back there. Can you just wait for the mic, and then I've got someone about 4 or 5 rows in front.
Hi. On a drama series, how much of the sort of Foley sound, if you like, is recorded on set, and how much later in a Foley studio?
Just explain for those who don't know what Foley is.
Foley, yeah. I mean, Foley is the fact that I spend most of my... Well, here's a good one. I spend most of my time on the set trying to stop that happening. I never want that to happen over a word, because he's going to get very upset if I do, because it's a big spiky noise in the middle of it. So we would ask the actor to do that, so that it's between two words. But we're just as likely to stick a bit of carpet underneath this if you can't see that in the camera shot, so when it goes down it doesn't actually make much of a noise. So it's a great question. It's a little bit piece of string. Foley, it's named after an American gentleman who kind of invented it. Foley is when you have finished the film, you've cut it all together, and you watch it in a recording studio, and you put back all the noises which aren't on what we call the production track. That's what I record. And that will tend to be all of those noises, and also, I'll do this gently, sound department, these noises as well. So clothing noise, because if you get very anoraki and you really, really listen to a piece of drama on the telly, you'll find out that when somebody turns to talk to somebody like that, you will probably hear a little shh noise, which is the sound of the cloth that we're all wearing. That's likely to be a combination, as you said, of Foley and production sound. I try to get rid of everything that isn't somebody speaking, unless it's a sequence when nobody speaks, in which case I've got carte blanche to record everything. But if people are speaking, I'm trying to get rid of footsteps, clothing noise, hums, buzzes, clunks, bits of liquid, all of that, so that what you get presented with is just voice. And then Foley watch the whole program, and they put it all back. It sounds slightly insane, but it just comes back to that thing that if I record all the other noises and the footsteps and everything else, when you try to make the voice louder, you make all of them louder, and what you're actually probably trying to do is you're probably trying to lift the voice out of this bed of other sounds, which is why we drive people mad. Certainly on the Burton Taylor clip, when she walks up to him, when he walks up to her and there's the no parrots bit, every single square inch of that floor that you couldn't see had carpet on it. But if you actually saw a wide shot, it would be floorboards. I put the carpets because I don't want to hear them going clunk, 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 clunk. And the footsteps that you heard in that were Foley I know they're Foley footsteps because there were none on my track. So it's very variable. People prefer no extraneous sound on a production track, and they prefer to do it afterwards because it's control.
About control. There was a question just there. Yes. Sorry. About the white top.
This is a question for both of you. Obviously, you've done so well in your life in terms of your career. From, say, go back like 30 years backwards, what advice would you give to yourself or us that you would have done differently?
I'd have done better at school.
Okay.
But I think that's probably a personal thing. I don't know that in my side of sound recording whether that would have done an awful lot more. I think in general, my advice to anybody when they're starting off trying to get into our field, and Robert's and my field are very different, but they are connected, but it's passion. And I know people think that sound recorders tend to be, Jesus sandals and socks and real ales with embarrassing names and kind of a bit socially challenged. It is about passion. It is about absolutely being completely manic about doing it. Don't expect it to be glamorous, which I think an awful lot of people think, oh, sound recording, great, I'll be in the studio recording my favourite band on massive multi-tracks with flashing lights everywhere and whatever. It's pretty grim. I spend most of my time standing in rainstorms and snow and all that kind of stuff, very, very still, freezing cold, soaking wet, desperately waiting for the actor to remember their lines. You just have to have a passion for it. And great thing that we said, the only stupid question is the one that you didn't ask. Ask everybody questions. Anybody like myself, anybody you can come across, email us, phone us up, text us, you pin us down in the street, try to get to watch us working. Ask people questions. There is not an enormous amount of vocational training in sound. available anymore since the BBC stopped doing quite so much of it. So make use of people who are now in my position. Most of us are fairly generous with our time and want you to succeed because we want to retire.
Robert, do you want anything you'd add to that?
I completely echo that. I mean, I get paid for doing my hobby, and I think that's the thing. You've got to really want to do the job. And I think sound is incredibly rewarding in television because, as I said, nobody really understands it apart from the sound people. And I've had a fantastic time doing what I do, and exactly the same thing. Eventually I want to retire, which is why I'm talking to you lot to take it all on board, because there aren't a lot of people banging on my door saying, actually, I want to come and work on the X Factor. Although people can say they want to come and work on the X Factor, but nobody wants to sit there and take the pressure and it's not, there isn't that much glamour in that side of it. It is quite a lot of nuts and bolts. It is quite a lot of hard work. The one thing I would say is I think the best sound people that I know are the people that plan well. And I think we're supposed to be doing some things after this. One of my things is that you do absolutely plan for every eventuality, and that's why there's a bit of an anorak in all of us, and we're possibly on the spectrum of it, where we will plan for things that go wrong. If you're doing a live television program that's for 2 hours, there's no way you can imagine every scenario, but you keep yourself awake at night by thinking about what happens if that piece of equipment crashes, what happens if that, you have to plan for most eventuality or any eventualities that you can come up with, and there is no substitute for experience, and there is no substitute for hard work and putting long hours in. But it is great. I mean, as I say, I get paid for doing my hobby, but don't tell the people that I charge a lot of money to.
We've run out of time, but I just echo both what Robert Simon says, and that's not just about sound, but every aspect of television and film craft. It's not very glamorous. It's pain. I think one of the things you've realised here is just what an enormous amount of painstaking skill and certainly planning. I think the more you know, the more you can eliminate the unpredictable in this business, the better. But also, so it is quite hard work. It can even be a bit dull at times, repetitive at times. But actually, when you see it come together, when you go, when you get that award nomination, or frankly, when you overhear someone at the bus stop talking about the thing that you did, there is no better feeling. And I think we all probably feel slightly that we'd have probably done this for nothing, but don't tell anyone. I'd like you all to put your hands together and thank Robert and Simon for a fantastic session.